warning. So we're back here for our week 3 of coding bootcamp, and we're still doing web development foundations. So we're going to build off what we did on Tuesday, where we started doing connecting Django, the framework that we're using for backend things, and the focus of day 6, which is our halfway point, which is also kind of cool. We're going to be connecting the back end to the front end. So the end of today, our goal is to have a homepage that we could customize that's up and running on the URL that we have. So to refresh everyone's memory, that's the extent, I think, of the slides for today. So I told you again, we're not going to be doing a ton of slides. We're going to go into our Python Anywhere. And to refresh our memory on where we're supposed to be, following along at home, then I'm going to open up my web tab, a new link, and go to the site. And it should see a screen like this that says that we installed Django properly, and says the install worked successfully, and there's a little rocket taking off and launching. So this is the point that we're beginning at. We're going to build from here and do a few more things to configure this so that we can start working next week and focus just on the development of the front end, and then the week after on more of our application specific back end. So this stuff, although we're going to call it back end stuff, and then the next week we're going to differentiate with front end, I want to be clear that those terms broadly are talking about things that users interact with, which would be the front end stuff, and things that users typically do not, which is going to be the back end stuff. So the front end is going to be the website that people see and interact with and poke around on. The back end is going to be your database and a lot of the things that we're doing here, this configuration type thing. Today specifically, we're going to cover how Django handles URLs. So we have this base URL up here, and to recall, URL stands for Universal Resource Location. And that's quite literally just the address at which a file is located on a computer somewhere in the world. So think about it like your home address. You're going to have this beginning part, and then we're going to learn how to add other things to it. So remember, we talked about what HTTP stands for. It's the protocol computers use to do this communication between each other. And what we're going to work on today is setting up other URLs, other resource locations. So it's going to be pointing to files that a computer can go and grab and load and run the way we have before. We're going to set up, I'm going to show you which we're going to set up. We're going to set up this URL. It's sort of a reserved URL for now that comes standard with Django called admin. It's going to be the admin panel. When I do this now, it's going to break. So if you're following along and you type in admin / at the top of your URL, I want to show this as well because we have our, if you recall, our settings set to debug equals true in our settings file. This is what we're going to see if something goes wrong. It's going to be an error message like this. It's going to give us some detailed information all the way down to lines of code that were called. And so this is a lot like an error log. It's really useful. We don't want to have this open in production because this is great for hackers to get this information and do all kinds of stuff with it. So while you're developing, again, it might be useful to set a username and password to keep your site secure because this is useful for you in development. But what we're going to do is learn how to set this up, not just the admin itself that comes built in, but we're going to do a custom one that'll take us to this location as not the generic starter thing, but our own homepage. And the patterns that we use today are going to be the same patterns that we can use over and over again to make any number of pages we like for any number of projects we like. So this is going to be the starting point that we're going to be able to use to dig into. We have to do a few more configuration things that are standard practice at the beginning of a Django project before we can start developing this application-specific code. So before we dive into that, any questions about what we're supposed to be covering today or where we are now, what we covered up to this point? All right. Cool. So I'm going to go back into a bash console to start. Is going to be the first place that we're going to go. And we're going to do a couple of things from here that will be somewhat new, but it's going to be following the same patterns that we've been using so far broadly. First thing we need to do is make sure that we're in the right environment and get going, right? So we need to activate our virtual environment. Beginning, make sure that we're there all the time. And the command to do that is source, all lowercase, space. When we set this up last time, we called it my caps locked here. I'm all caps locked. Huh. Thought the thing was just big. Okay, source, not caps, lowercase. Source, space, my VM, short for virtual environment. Use tab complete to make sure that it exists and it's where you expect it to be. Bin, again, just B and then tab complete. Activate, A and tab complete. And then once I do this, I'll get the name of that environment over on the left. My VM says we're in that environment. Cool. So now we're going to change our directory into the top level my site project directory. And what should be in this one is our manage.py file. We need to be in that same directory as that. That's the main working directory that we run our commands from. And real quick, I know we didn't talk a lot about manage.py. I mentioned it before, but let's just have a look at what's in there, because it's a surprisingly simple amount of code. And if you look at this, I just did cat to print it out here on the screen. It just starts with an import statement that says OS and sys, and then there's a definition of a main function, which should be familiar from when we did this ourselves. There's a bunch of stuff happening here. There's a try block, which we didn't really cover, but it's just another logical control function or structure. Then down here, the if name equals main function that we saw before, and that calls the main function. So this pattern that we used is exactly how Django is built. So this should be very familiar to you when you read the manage.py file. What we're going to do today is we're going to use this by calling it the same way that we've called our own programs that we wrote in week 1 when we started just doing things from the command line, and we did Python 3 and the name of the file. We're going to be doing that today to set up the built-in parts of Django that we need for like site administration. So that admin URL that I showed you, to set all those things up, we're going to run a few commands through this manage.py. So the first of those commands, actually, before I keep running, any questions or thoughts up here? Anybody? Hopefully not completely lost.
Well, I never did get my rocket, but I was working on it. Can that be done maybe after?
Yeah, absolutely. I can stay on afterwards and make sure that you're caught
Okay.
up to that point,
right.
and then we can move to this point too if you need. But yeah,
Okay, so I'm
100%.
gonna listen in and pay attention.
Okay, sure.
Be a
All
good
right.
student.
And okay, so and again, don't hesitate to copy and paste from those direction sets that we sent. It should go really quickly if you do it that way. So if you want to try to like
Okay.
run to catch up, it's up to you. If you don't want to multitask, if you just want to listen this time and try to do it with the video later, that's also fine. And I'm open to connect with anybody one-on-one and try to fix whatever point you're stuck at, you know.
Okay.
So, and that's even beyond the 6 weeks. That's just an open invitation. Stay connected with us. This 6 weeks is just a time frame to keep us on pace to get something done. But you're not going to substantially learn something in that short time frame. You're gonna have to practice outside of it. And I want to make sure again that you're comfortable with it. You practice enough and you get questions answered. So reach out to us. Do it at your pace. Don't feel like if you don't hit 6 weeks, you failed in some way. Just stick with us to the end. Stay with it. So if you're not totally caught up, listening is totally fine. But I will make fun of you for not being able to do it. And I won't make fun of anybody. So, all right. So we're in our virtual environment and we're in the main folder. We're going to run our first command. The first command is it's a very powerful, interesting one. It's one that can create huge problems later on. But we got to start with it anyway. So what it's going to do is called migrate. It's going to run all of the initial databases that come built in with Python or with Django that we'll use for site administration. So this is the kind of thing that I'll show you what it does, but let's run it first. So we're going to do Python 3 and space manage.py, same syntax that we use to call our own folders. And then after manage.py, we're going to pass it something specific that we want to run out of Django. And the name of this command is migrate. So we're going to migrate the database configuration that comes standard in here, and it's going to set up our database in the instance that we have. So when I hit migrate, it's going to automatically run all this thing. It says operations to perform, apply all migrations, then it has this list, admin, auth, content types, and sessions. Those are all names of database tables. We're not going to get too deep into this right now because this is for week after next when we set up our own database tables and we run this command again. It'll be a little clearer, not exactly on what this is doing, but we'll talk about it more in depth then. So for right now, it's just something that we need to run at the beginning. And if you're doing this on your own device outside of Python anywhere, we'll talk about it in more depth. So for right now, it's just something that we need to run at the beginning. And if you're doing this on your own device outside of Python anywhere, we'll talk about it in more depth. So for right now, it's just something that we need to run at the beginning. And if you're doing this on your own device outside of Python anywhere, when you got up to the rocket launching thing, when you ran on your local host or your local environment, whatever your development environment is, you would have seen like a red warning that said you had to run these migrations before you actually do your project. So this is the first thing that we got to do. And now we have them and they're set up.
Yeah.
So
I
question, go ahead.
see things here like last name max length. That must
Yeah,
mean that there is a file, a set of something, some text file somewhere
yep,
that would let you alter those characteristics.
absolutely. That's a great question. And we'll get all into that. And again, this is for week after next when we do the database stuff, but spoiler alert, it's just classes. It's just Python classes on how we
Sure.
represent a database. So but yeah, no, that's absolutely true. That this is just building on the same principles we had before. These are files somewhere that are written in that can be either directly altered or overridden in some way in your code in the files that you have.
Because when I was in like Bangkok installing phone systems, the last names of these people that moved from China, they had a lot of immigrants,
Yeah.
and they made them pick a new name. They would not let them bring their old Chinese name with them, so they had to give a new name. And just Chinese culture, these people had war and peace for a last name, about talking about the prosperity their life was going to have, blah blah blah. I mean,
Huh.
it was stunning. I could not fit a single name into the normal stuff that I was used to dealing with. And
Wow.
I just see that as a way to, oh, I could make that lane
You
longer.
could make it make
Yeah.
space for it or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it
Well,
just
and so and
kind of,
that's a good point. So this is also something that I really want to be. It's a good moment to caution you though, because like I said, this is powerful. But anytime, and we'll get way more into this when we do database stuff. Anytime you make changes to a database, it's very very easy to make a mistake and have an error and have something conflict and break it. So they're really, think of them as really fragile. It's something that you don't want to do this a lot of times. So you want to make sure that you design, it's like a measure 3 times cut once sort of thing. Design your database well and don't plan on making frequent changes to it. Even though it is fairly flexible in Django to do it, and we'll show you how you can add things to a database and change it along the way. The more complex a project gets, the more likely you are to break something by changing something at this level. So
well,
yeah, it's
as you've seen, I'm
possible.
good at that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely possible to change all this stuff, but I would recommend that you go about it by a clearly laid out plan beforehand, and you do it with a clear intention as to why. It's not something you kind of mess around with halfway.
Okay.
But
Fair enough.
even though it is fun to do it that way, and I typically do things where I just mess around with it halfway. But um, all right. So now that we've got these things loaded, to another step that's really standard to be able to access any of the things in the admin panel that comes standard, which I'm going to show you soon, is we need to set up a user for that, and a super user. So this is also a very standard set of commands to start a project. We're going to do the same pattern again with the Python 3 manage.py. And we're going to type create super user, all one word, no caps, just one big jumble of letters that says create super user. And when we hit enter on this, it's going to take us through an interface that's directed to give us a username. If not, leave it blank to do what you have here. So I'm just going to hit enter to use that. It says to give it an email address. You can put in whatever. It doesn't matter. It needs something. Um, you know, but it makes no difference if it's a real email address. They're not going to be emailing anyone out of this. So it's just a required part that's in this. Is again it's just making a class. These are required parts of the class for the user that's going to create in the back. So when you get to the password part, this is something that's really, really off-putting for people if you've never done this before. As soon as you start typing, you're not going to get any information back. The cursor won't move. There won't be any characters that pop up on the screen. Nothing. It'll look like nothing's happening. It is taking your password though, so you got to be really careful what you type. You're not going to see anything, and it's going to make you re-enter it. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my password. You're not going to see anything though. Just I am doing it right now, and you can't see anything because nothing is happening. But when I hit enter, it's going to tell me to re-enter my password. So it took it the first time. So if you're following along, don't be scared if nothing pops up. You type your password. That's how it's supposed to work. So now, again, if you're following along, do Python 3 manage.py, create super user, enter some sort of username or leave it blank to default to your Python Anywhere username. Give us some sort of email addresses. Doesn't matter if it's real. Type in your password. and then you're ready to go. So what this is going to do is going to give us a way to go to that URL that I showed you before. It's going to give us what's called an admin panel, and it's now set up and it's in there. But first, let's get in the habit of doing this. Refresh our web application because we've made changes on what we call server side, which is the back end. So there's two sides to the HTTP. There's a client side, which is where we're all interacting with on our computers. And then there's server side, which is where the source code is written. So now that that's refreshed, see if it worked. Now if I go to the admin URL, I should see this really ugly looking page that says that there's some stuff happening here. I can skip to main content, but I can log in. So I should be able to enter that username and password that I made and go log in. I'm not going to do that now because this looks terrible. So another thing that we're going to do to set up a project that's going to be required, especially when we start doing front end things, is how Django handles static files as they're called. And I mentioned this before when I highlighted what's on your web app thing. But static files are a lot of what the front end needs to look nice. So the front end is this web page, and all the colors and the alignment and all that stuff. That's formatting. That's all front end stuff that we're going to use static files to direct to. Diane, you have a question?
Okay, just out of curiosity,
Sure.
the username, the password, does this populate or save it to where you don't have to type it in, but you do, or do you have to type it in password each time?
I mean, you can save it in your browser the first time you write this in, just like any password you save in your browser. You could do that,
Right.
but it's not going to save when you write it in the command line or in your console. It's
Okay,
not going to save anywhere. You got to remember it for sure. So there's no,
okay. Or write it down somewhere, huh?
yeah. Or I mean, you can use something generic again. If this is don't worry about making it hyper secure.
Okay,
Again, I recommend securing your website by using a decent username and password here,
right.
and then the one that you use as your admin for this. If it's not a real project, you could just, or even just you get starting, just use something really generic, and then you can make a secure password later or something like that for another user or something like that. This is just to get in and get going. So
Okay,
honestly, just make something you can remember that you're going to use again. But yeah, that's a good question. It's not going to be saved anywhere automatically, but you can save it in your browser like any other password
okay.
once you enter here.
And just make sure your caps lock key is off. I
Yes.
locked myself
Yeah,
out of some
yeah.
gear one time when I had the caps lock key on and my password was the exact opposite of what I thought I was typing.
Right.
'Cause
But so
every
then,
cap was now lowercase and it was inverted, and
yeah,
I until I realized that I was locked out of that gear and really not having a good night.
it's the worst. It's the worst. So,
Yeah.
and again, another point about that, this, since we're doing it at this level and we can do it directly in the command line, if you get locked out of one of these accounts, just make another super user, give yourself a password you can remember, just make it like 1 2 3 4, go back in there and change the password, because you could do all those site administrative things. I'll show you sort of what's in there once we get it making, once it looks nice enough to actually navigate. The Django admin panel is for site administrators. So, oops, sorry, let me exit that. We don't have so what we do when we say backend stuff is the sort of thing that you're going to have for just a limited set of people, again, like site administrators, and that's what comes standard with Django. We're not going to usually give access to most users to the admin panel, but you could do a lot of the operations that we're going to build towards the front end, like the creating things, updating them, seeing what's in your database, and all those sorts of things. So before I talk too much about that, let's get it set up to where it looks at least nice enough and we can navigate and tell what we're looking at. To do that, we're going to have to set up our static files. So our static files are, again, things like CSS that we're going to cover next week, and JavaScript, any of the front end things that don't sit on server side. They're more for the client side. When a web browser comes to and sends a request to a server that's a computer somewhere else that has the source code, it sends some back. These files are the ones that are going to be operating in the browser, making it look pretty, doing the stuff that makes it look cool. So to do that, the first thing we have to do is set up our settings. We have to adjust some settings in our settings.py file. So I'm going to do that over in the GUI. It's just a little bit more user-friendly, easier to see what we're doing. So to refresh your memory, my site. And it should be right here, our settings.py. I'm going to open up settings.py. And we are going to set up a few different things on this. The first thing we need to do is we need to import a package that we're going to be using. It's standard in Python, so we don't have to go out of our way or do the extra step of importing it with pip. So we just do a simple import statement at the top, and we do import OS, that's short for operating system. And this allows us to do all kinds of cool stuff. To set different things, we can grab the user that signed in. We can do all kinds of different stuff. And we're going to do setting up our directories where Django can expect to find our static files. And another thing that we're going to use later are templates, which the concept I'll explain in a minute. But first, to set up the static file directories, we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the settings file. And here I can zoom this in a little bit. I didn't make this larger, so we can see a little better what I'm doing here. So I'm scrolling all the way down. There's going to be somewhere down around line 120. My static URL is on line 123 is where we're looking at. And we're going to add a couple other, these are technically called constants because they're all caps, but they're just variables, but they're not going to change. So technically they are constants, but not treated any differently than any other variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to say which places in our directory can Django look to find their static files. This one, this here, the static URL, is what's going to be listed at the top again in the website address. So when we're serving static files, it's like where to find it there. So that's going to be standard and that's going to be there. We're going to leave that one alone. We're going to add two things. The first one is called static root. So all caps, static _ root. And let me give it another space to make sure that we don't crowd what we're doing and you can see what it is. And then we're going to use that OS package that we imported at the top. So we're going to say is with the equal sign is os.path, which is built into it. And we're going to say join the base directory, which is called above. If you want to read the call for that, this is just kind of the standard things built into Django that says where your project is in that file system that we talked about already, that Linux file structure. And we're going to add, so this join function is going to add two things together. It's going to take that and it's going to add the name of a directory that we give it. So we could choose any name at this point. But this static root, what it does is going to take all static files from every application that you have, and it's going to pull it into one centralized spot before you run your program. And it's going to run all the static files out of that one place. So this has to be the name of one location. It can't be the same name as anything else. That's going to be the main place that you keep your static files for the entire Django project. So remember, we have my site, and then there's the underlying my site folder directory that we're in now with the settings file. When we make other applications, those things will have static files in them. I'll show you that here shortly. And we'll collect all those static files and put it in one spot. So that's what this directory is going to be. So for that reason, we usually call it lowercase, sorry, some version of a main something, like the main static file. So we know that that's what to expect it. So we're going to say main, usually put that slash at the end. All right, so that's the place where it's going to collect all of the static files. We're going to run shortly that command to collect. It's called collect static, and it's going to collect our static files there. The other constant that we need to set before we move on is called the static _dirs, static dirs, short for directories. This is going to tell Django where to look in applications for static files. So we're just telling it, what are we going to call our static file folders in our directories whenever we make a new application? So this also is going to be a folder that we're going to use, but Django isn't going to make it like it will static main. Django will make this folder if it doesn't exist. This directory, it'll look for it. If it doesn't exist, it'll make it. This one is just going to look for it. It's not going to make it if it doesn't exist. It's going to look to find it. It's going to expect to see it. And we can name it again pretty much whatever we like. Typically, we just name it static, just like the static URL at the top. Don't confuse the two. They are different things, but they can be called the same thing, and that's totally fine. It's not going to be a problem. It will be a problem, however, if you call this static root and something else. If you call those the same name, that will be an issue, and you'll get errors and it'll break. So make sure that your static root is a unique name. And by convention, we normally add static dirs as static, because then we know in our application, it just makes sense when we're looking at the file structure where our static files are. So when we're working outside of this particular piece of Django, it's easier for us to keep track of. So that's a convention, as is this, the static URL. So again, these two can match. Static URL and static dirs can match. They can both be static. That's fine. But static root has to be different, and whatever you like. All right. So once we set those up, that's telling Django where to look for these things. There's one other thing we need to do before we leave here that we're going to need to use later, and I just don't want to have to come back. So it's just going to be easier to do it now. And we're going to add a directory to our templates here on line 59. And what this is going to do is when we get to setting up our homepage, this is going to tell Django where to look for the template for the homepage. That'll become clearer once we get there, but let's add the setting now so that we have it set up and ready to go. So under this, it starts at line 59, the templates list, and inside there's a dictionary that has several key value pairs. The first is backend. The second is DIRs, short for directories, and there's a list, an empty list in there. Nothing in this list. And so we're going to add the directories that it should look for templates. And again, it's going to be some variation of the base dir, short for base directory. That's, again, if you scroll to the top of this, you can see what that is. And we're going to add just the word templates as a string. So base dir, all caps with a underscore in between, comma, templates with, oh, I'm sorry, not comma. This is separated by a slash. That would have been a problem. Sorry, separated by a slash. So correction. So base dir slash templates as a string. This is telling it that we're going to have a folder. It's going to expect a folder or directory with name templates that will hold our templates later, and we're going to set those up. So these are the changes that we need to make to our settings file. We imported OS up here at the top. We set somewhere around, line 60, the dirs, we're in 62, says base dir slash templates as a string in the list for the value of that base dir's key value pair. And then at the bottom, we added our static root, which has to be a unique folder name, a directory name, and static dirs, which can match the static URL and is usually called static by convention. So those are the changes we need to make. We'll save this if it plays along. And then we're going to go back to our console and make sure that this worked. We're going to run a command to collect all those static files and put them in there. And then we can see if it works, because this comes standard again with some static files to make that admin panel look pretty. So to do that, we're going to do Python 3, manage.py, and then collect, all lowercase, static, all one word, all lowercase. When we hit enter, it should, hopefully, if we didn't do anything wrong and everything likes to play along the way we like it to, it'll take a little bit, but then it'll tell us how many files that it copied into, and I think it tells us where they copied them into. So there we go. It says 126 static files copied to, and then it gives me the directory that copied to. So it says static main. So I should be able to see, since I'm in that working directory, I should be able to see that there's a static main here now. And there it is. So we got ourselves a static main file directory. I'm going to show you this other cool way to see what's in these directories as we start making these things, and we're going to get more complex sort of file structures going out. A really nice way to see all this is called the tree command. And I'm going to use this a few times to show where we are. So I like using tree, and it's going to show everything that's in here. I always add the flag with capital I because it's for ignore, and then I set some patterns to just leave out so we don't get too much stuff. So I always leave out double underscore PyCache because there's a bunch of stuff that we don't need to look at. A vertical bar to mean or, so we could put in several criteria that we don't want it to include. So I'm going to put JS for any JavaScript stuff. I'm going to put CSS because the stuff that comes standard in Python or in Django is going to be too much. then image, because we don't want to see any of those things. I'm gonna close this string off, and when I run this, it'll give me this cool little diagram that just shows me what the directory tree structure looks like. So that way I can see into several directories. I don't have to do ls for each one of them. So right here at the top, this little period, that's the directory I'm in now. It's called my site. So I'm at, that counts it as the root for this project. And this is our database that comes standard with Django. It's a SQLite 3. Looking at the details of that, it's not good for production, but it's good for all that. We've got our manage.py. We have the my site subdirectory with all the things that come in that. And now we also have this static _main directory that has admin inside of it. And admin is going to have a bunch of, again, CSS files, JavaScript files, and stuff that I filtered out to not list all that, or else it would fill this up with junk, and we don't need that. All right, so now we've done that. We've collected our static files. We go back to our web app page and refresh the server side again to make sure that this is connecting the server side code, which is our source codes, our settings files, and all the other files and stuff that we see here, our directories. We're refreshing that on the server side. And now we go back to the client side, which is our web browser that's sending the request to that server and it's giving it to us, the client. And we're going to have we're going to refresh that, and it'll make it look pretty. And now it looks more like a website that we'd want to interact with. And it should allow us, wait, no, I should do my actual username. Let's see if this works. So we should be able to log in and see what's in there by standards. So this is the admin panel. And this, again, is something that you would normally not give access to most people. This is for site administrators. When you're building the site, this is a way that you're going to be able to see and do a lot of things. So we can go even into our users. Like I said before, if you ever get locked out of this one that you made and you forget what it was, you forget the password or whatever the case may be, you can just run that, create super user, make another one, come in here and adjust this user, that user, reset the password. There's a form to reset passwords in here. So you can update them. You can add names, right? This is trying to tell me to fill in my own name. There's no need to. You could do things like user groups and permissions in here. It's all built in. And as you build applications, you can add groups and user permissions to those applications automatically through this interface. And it's all just built in. So you don't have to do any of this stuff from scratch. So that's really, really, really useful. And that's why we think of, again, Python as a back-end framework. It gives you all this stuff to do a lot of this work on the back-end side. And we'll come back in here again once we've made our own. But once we make our own database things, because these are just the databases. Honestly, the user is just a database table. And there's just an entry in that. When we make our own for the to-do list app, it'll be listed here as well. And it'll just add your applications over here on the left-hand side where it says authentication and authorization. That's just a Django application that they give to you standard. So as we write our own applications, they'll also appear on the left, and they'll have similarly available administrative functions for each database that we create, that you create for your applications. And you can customize all of this. So if you really want to change the color schemes, you really want to change any of this, you totally can. We're not going to do any of that, but this is available to you. And again, it comes in standard. So to get back to our site, this links us back to our site. If we want to just go back, there's a little thing up here at the top. It always says view site. I guess I could probably zoom in a little bit here too. So it's larger. So if I click on this view site link, it'll take me back to our rocket launching homepage. So we've now set up the admin panel to our application, or our soon-to-be application. And this is, again, standard parts and practices for the beginning phases of a Django project. Any questions up to there? Any issues? Anybody totally stuck somewhere or get derailed and have an issue that we want to get unstuck?
Mine's complaining that OS is not. Did I miss an import?
Did you not import it? Is it saying that the package doesn't exist, or that it's like not
Yeah, it's
defined?
just it's complaining about OS. Yeah.
Yeah, double check that
the
you
error
imported
name
it.
OS is not defined. So let's try our
Yeah.
collect static and that time it ran. Okay. Yep. So I just had to add the import statement on top of settings.py.
Yep. Absolutely. It's easy to forget. That's why we usually start there. But all right, cool. So then what we're going to do now, if there are no other questions or issues, is we're going to move out of the site administration. That's okay. We can just go back to our rocket launching. And we're going to set up a way to serve up the homepage through a template. Again, we set up our template file in the settings, or directory and settings, and now we're going to go make some templates that we can use. But first, we're going to have to set up the routing system that Django uses for URLs to say, okay, at what address will I find, or should I expect to find a certain template? So we're going to set that up to show how URLs are routed through Django. The way that it does it, we go back to our console, and this is, remind I kept the folder structure up, and this is the top level My Site project folder. What we're going to do is we're going to start our application. So routing, even though we're not going to build too much with our to-do list application, we're going to use it to route the URLs for the whole project. So let's dive straight into that. We're already in our virtual environments. We are already in our directory that has the manage.py file, so we can further just run commands. And this is going to be a very simple command. We're just going to say Python 3. If I can spell Python 3 correctly. You'd think after this many times repeating it that I would. I'm going to do Python 3 space manage.py using tab complete to get it right. And then we're going to say start app. All one word, all lowercase, space, and then we're going to give this app a name. And I'm just going to call it to do, which may not be the best naming convention, because in some, what do you call it? Things like VS Code and PyCharm and stuff like that, it'll actually find your to-dos and make a to-do list, which is kind of cool, but whatever. We'll use it for demonstrative purposes to keep track of what we're talking about. So you do Python 3, manage.py, start app, all one word, space, application name. And when I hit enter, it's going to do that. To prove that it did, we're now going to once again run our tree command. I'm just going to press the up arrow to get my tree command back out of my history so that I don't have to rewrite all the filters that I don't want to see. And I'm going to hit enter to see my new file structure, my new directory structure. So as you can see, it's a little bit bigger, a little bit more going on. So here's the dot at the top that shows where we are. That's our root. That's our current location is in My Site top level project folder directory. And now we have this to do directory that contains another init.py. That means it's a module. It's got an admin.py, which we're not going to worry too much about. Apps, models, which is for later. This is where we're going to write our classes, which are our databases. They're called models in Python. Tests, which I neglect terribly. I hardly ever write them, but they come here and they tell you that they exist. And then views. Views is where we're going to spend not a ton of time today, but we will spend a significant amount of time. And the patterns that this follows is that the views are either functions or classes. We'll start with, we'll do functions. We might do a class later on, but we'll start with functions. And these functions are going to tell Django how to route things to which URLs, like which templates. This is where the connection really happens between a template and a URL. So it goes from the view, we write a view, and then we're going to route it through our URLs. So I'm going to open up these files. We're going to look inside. We're going to be bouncing around between the My Site URLs file, the views down here, and we're going to make another URLs file for just this application. And I'll tell you why, because it gets really long if you try to keep it in one file. So we don't want to do that. But that's generally, so the patterns that we're going to follow now to set this up and get our homepage running are patterns that you can follow to set up as many pages as you like. It's always going to be the same thing. You're going to write a view for the page that you want, and then you're going to go route it through a URL setting somewhere. So it's going to be views, URLs, views, URLs, and then we're going to make a template for it, which we don't have yet. We don't have a folder for templates yet, but we'll make that when we get to it. So right now, let's start by writing a view. Let's see what that view can be. So we're going to go to our files, and we're just going to do this in the file editor. Actually, I'll just go in here in settings, so we don't need settings anymore. So I'm just going to go back to the top level project folder. I'm going to find my to-do application that we just made, the directory. And I'm going to open up my views.py. So I'm in the directory to do views.py. You can see it comes standard with this import statement that says from Django shortcuts input render. So render is one of the packages that's going to let us render a some sort of bit of information to the screen in the browser. And we're going to use that for a lot of functions. There are some other ways to do it, but this is what comes standard. This is what we're going to use now to serve up our homepage. So we're going to do a definition of a function the way we've done before. It's going to be a very simple function. By convention, a lot of times you could call the root, the homepage index in a file system, like for a website. So we're going to use that here just to know that that is our homepage, our index, our basic part. And we're going to take in a request. It's going to expect in a request. A request, again, is something that's sent from a browser, a client, from a machine to a server that has certain information, and it follows the HTTP set of instructions, the protocol, and it will expect back a response from them. Now, to get this to render our page, what we're going to return is that render package, which is going to expect some information. It's going to expect the request that was sent to it, that again is going to have header information, going to have a bunch of stuff in there. And then we're going to pass it the name of the template that we wanted to use. So we're going to do index.html. We've mentioned HTML before. So it's a markup language. That's what ML stands for. HT is hypertext, so hypertext markup language. We'll do a very little bit of it towards the end of the class today, and we'll spend more time on it next week. But it's going to be the sort of front end language that dictates where things are laid out on your page. So we're going to make an HTML file today that's going to be our home file. It's going to be called index.html. So now that we have that, we're going to save this in our views.py. And that's it. That's the first view. That's the entirety of a view. That will serve. It will take in a request that when we go to a place, we haven't routed it yet, but when we go to a URL, it will find this index.html, and it will serve it up for us. So to route the URL, to tell it where to find this, to tell the browser where to find this whole thing, we're going to need to make a URL map. And if you recall, there's URLs here at the top level. So I'm going to open that up, actually. We're going to have a look at that and see what's in it, because it's important to understand what comes standard and what is here, because we're going to follow the same pattern to make our own URLs. So we already looked at the admin URL. We already went to this. We wrote admin. We wrote it when it wasn't set up before we ran the migrate for the database and set up our super user and all that stuff. We saw that this broke and it didn't work. Now, this is the code that made it happen. So there are a couple of import statements. We import the admin thing because that's what's used down here. We import this thing called path, which is used in this URL patterns list to make the path. So this first part here is the name that's going to be added to your basic URL domain, right? So when you want to make a new URL, this is where we're going to add it. Now, we're not going to add anything to this top level URL for our application, for the homepage. We're not going to do that here. We could just add the index in here. But what we're going to do, because it's best practice to have another set of URLs for each application, we're going to set that into our to-do application that we just made. Now, it doesn't come standard, even though it is common that people put URLs in each application. It doesn't come standard, so there is no urls.py now in the to-do list application. So what we're going to do is we're going to create that file. I'm just going to do it from here, from the command line. You can create it wherever you like. On the GUI if you like. So we're just going to do touch to do using tab complete, and then same thing, urls.py. So it's going to be the same name as the one that's in the my site directory, which can be confusing. So again, this is why you got to really keep track of what directory you're in when you're making changes on what thing. Now, this will become more apparent on why we do it this way once we have more URLs. But basically, it's going to keep it more organized. The more applications you make, the more cluttered one single urls.py file will get. Because each of these, each time we have like a new form or a new view that we want to create, we're going to end up having a whole bunch of URLs assigned to just this one app. And usually projects have multiple applications. So it gets really cumbersome to have all those lists jammed into one place. And this is just a nicer way to do it. But it is possible to run all of this out of one URL file. This is just kind of like one of the better practices I won't claim that it's a best practice. Again, to have an idea of where we are, we have our now urls.py file in there. And if we want to open it and have a look, so this is our top level URLs file. Let's flip over to our new one, to do URLs. So this has got nothing in it. It's absolutely, there's nothing here at all. So we're going to have to start by putting some things in. Similarly, we're going to need to use that path package that was in the top level URL. So we're going to start by importing that. So sorry, from Django.urls. Sorry, I can make my screen larger so it's easier to read. We're going to import, zoom stuff, import path, all lowercase. And then we're going to say from this directory that we're in, from, well, not the directory we're in, the root directory. So the top level, again, if we go back to our tree structure, similarly, Django will refer to the top project level as just dot. That's where it is. So from dot, we're going to import the views that we write. So that view that we wrote, we're going to import that and all the other views by doing this command here. So now we have access to that view that we wrote, and we can start routing it similarly to what we saw with the top level where we had the admin routing. We're going to use the same URL patterns variable. This is the standard name. It's what it expects. So don't get creative and start calling it other things. Again, I'm not going to call out who, but there are times to do that and times not to. This is a time not to. So follow the URL patterns, all one word, lowercase. It's what Django expects to find. And then you're going to set that to a list. And this list is going to contain all the patterns that you want to use. And so it's all the URLs that you want to use. And what we're setting up now is our homepage. It's the basic one. So again, arguably you could put this at the top and it would be okay, but I want to show how it runs through different things and how all of our other URLs are going to come through this application this way. So I don't want you to see this as the best practice for the system architecture and where to put things exactly. This has a lot more to do with the mechanics and where things typically are. So, again, the index could be moved other places. We're going to set the index up here though. So our path that we're going to run is going to be the root path. So it's an empty string. So there's nothing here. So this is your username dot, pythonanywhere.com. And we're going to use the views that we imported, and we're going to take the index that we created. So we do views.index, all lowercase, no spaces. And then we're going to give a name keyword so that we can identify this later from other places. And we're going to call it index so that we're keeping it consistent with what we're calling it. And in Python lists, we can do this trailing comma that leaves it open for the next thing in the list down behind it. And it's really a good idea to put that in there, and it'll accept it as the last item. So even if you have one item in the list and you're not adding anything else right now, you could put this comma here, it won't break anything. And I'm highlighting this because it's really a good idea to get in the habit of doing it, because you're going to add more paths to this list. Like we're gonna have probably, I think, 5 or 6 by the time we're done with this. And it's something that's easy to overlook once you start doing this and you're jumping between files and you're trying to route these views that you're making, especially when you're trying to make somewhat complex logic with the view and trying to remember where everything is going and what the templates are called. Overlooking a comma is easy to do. So get in the habit of ending, even if there's only one thing, ending it with a comma. It's just, you're going to save yourself a lot of hassles if you get that habit. So that's it. So this is the pattern that we're going to set up. We're going to say path, give it the empty string. That's like the root. So it's going to be your URL. It's going to say views index name, and then it's going to say index. All right. So the way that we're going to get this to route all the way through for the whole thing. First of all, we're gonna have to save it because we made some changes. So let's save that before we move on. We're gonna have to adjust the URLs, the top level URLs, to expect, use, and include the URLs from each application. So go back to that top level URLs file. So my site, similarly name my site. Now we're in that URLs. What we're going to do here is we're going to add a way to include all of the to-do list application URLs in here so that we don't have to add them individually here. We're just going to add the one path to the URLs that the to-do list has, and then we can just keep adding to-do list URLs all day long, and this will just have one entry in this list. So the purpose of this is, as the projects you do get larger and there are more applications, this will list each application, and then each application will have its own set of URLs that's several long, and this will be long as well. It's just a way to keep it better organized. So any questions about why we're doing 2 URL lists on 2 different places before we finish this code up? I want to make sure that conceptually we're clear on why we're doing it this way.
This is that separation of concerns you were talking about earlier, right?
It is, and this will become a lot clearer as we build more views for our application. The to-do list is going to have a bunch of them, and this is just a way to keep it organized. So again, we could write them all into one place. We could separate this and concatenate several things and separate it by application. That way, there are other approaches to this. This is just one kind of simple way to do it.
But that way, when some part of the website is broke, you go to that part and fix that list.
Exactly. It's much easier
without having to look
debug.
through everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of coming to one huge master list that's just gigantic. So, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to import first a package from the Django URLs utility that's already here. We're just going to add another package to import by adding a comma after the word path up here on line 18. And we're just going to type the word include. So we're going to import this other package called include. And that'll give us the ability to add a path here that will include all of the URLs that we list in the to-do list. So we're going to pass again the empty string to begin with, and then a comma. And then we're going to call include that we imported. And then we're just going to do to-do.urls. Oh, sorry, I'll keep this consistent. I apologize for the mixing double and single. Double quotations. So quotations, close off of the string, we include URLs, close off our path, and then add a comma because we're adding a list item. All right, now we have these 2 URL paths. They're set up, and what this top one's going to do on line 21 is it's going to say, all right, cool. When we load up, I want you to go down to your URLs application, or it's a to-do application, look at the URLs there, and use all of these that are in there as well. And so we've set up in this one for now our index, which is going to load the view that we wrote. So this is going to be the view. And it's, if we go back to, sorry, went too far back. We go back to the view that we wrote. It's just a simple function, a Python function. We named it index because that's the page that we're going to expect to see here. That's the view that we want to see. It's going to take in a request, and then it's going to send back this template. So the last step that we need to do is to make this template. We've set up our route. We've set up our view. We've told it what we want to do. We have to go now create a template. So creating a template is very simple, very straightforward process that we're going to make a directory at the top level for this one, because this is going to end up, again, being the top level sort of project thing. Each application will have its own set of templates inside. We've already told Django where to look, where to expect this directory to be, what expect it to be called is going to be called templates. And we're going to add it on to, again, our top level project folder. So at the dots. Let's clear this screen up. Let's zoom stuff in my way here. So clear this up. And then we're going to make the directory. So mkdir templates. And then I'm going to just include all in one shot because it's faster that way, the creation call. So I'm just going to do double ampersands to say also do this, like do the first thing, then do this second thing. And I'm going to say touch, and then I'm going to give it the full directory, the templates. And I can't tab complete this because it doesn't exist yet. So templates, and then I'm going to say index.html and put that template that we know we're going to be using, that we made the view for, that we set up in our URL, into the templates folder that we told in the settings, told Django to look for it in this directory. So we're going to set that up. We're going to make that happen. And now, if I check out my tree structure, Again, so it's kind of a good way to look and visualize where we are with these things. I'm going to zoom out just a bit so it fits better. I have to do it a little bit more. We can see we have our templates index now, or our templates directory right here. And it's underneath the static main directory, and it has our index.html file inside of it. So we can go open that up and do some things with it. So let's do that now. Let's put something in it because it's, we know it's going to be empty. We didn't do anything. So let's go back to our files. Well, I'm doing it the long way. I could have navigated the top like I have been. But here it is, our templates directory at the top level. So it's equivalent of my site, static main, and the to-do application. Here's our index.html. Cool. So now we have this empty HTML file. Now we're going to spend a lot more time next week talking about HTML tags. I mean, we're not going to do a ton of HTML, but it's really unavoidable. All the front end stuff that you see on the internet has HTML at some point, in some variety, in some way. So let's just put in a real basic framework so we got something to look at. And then next week we'll revise it, make it look prettier, and talk about front end frameworks that make it even better. But we will also talk a little more about how Django interacts with these things. We might actually cover a bit of that today if we've got time and everybody's kind of tracking up to this point. So let's write some really basic HTML though, and talk about the basic parts of it. So, one of the first things that's standard is, and I kind of skipped this when we did the Python program on the command line. It's not ultra important, but you can do it in Python too. It's this thing that's, it's called like a bang operator. It tells you what the file is. So it tells the interpreter what the file is that it's expecting. And it's just sort of a standard that we put this all caps doc type. So we do a less than bracket, exclamation point, and then all caps doc type, and then lowercase HTML, and then the greater than symbol. And these less than, greater than symbol, this whole, this something, that something, this is called a tag in HTML. So anybody that's not done HTML before, this is generally called a tag. And the basic part of a tag is the front part it'll have the name of the tag in it, and the back part will have what's called the closing tags. The first part is the opening tag, and this part with the slash is the closing tag. And we put things in between these tags. Sometimes we'll put things in between the tag name and that greater than symbol, and we'll put different attributes in here. If I could spell the word attribute, and then we set it to something. And we'll be doing that throughout, and we could do a number of things, but that's basically HTML. Like that's pretty much it. You got tags, you can adjust those tags. It's really just a matter of going and finding what tag you need for what purpose, kind of finding out what that tag does. And it could do a lot of things. Honestly, HTML could do a lot of stuff. So we're not going to go crazy with the HTML. We're just going to get some basic stuff on here again for something to look at. The first tag that we're going to use is an actual HTML tag. So when I type this in our editor, when I wrote the word tag, it did nothing for me because that doesn't exist as an actual tag. I was just doing that demonstratively. HTML exists as a tag. So this is telling it that the container inside of this thing is going to be our HTML text. It's going to be our HTML. I don't want to say code, but it's not. It's code. We'll say it's code. And we can do a whole bunch of different things. And yeah, Chris, I think you put somewhere in a comment that there's a bunch of standard stuff that comes into this in boilerplate. We're not going to get super deep into it. We'll add a little bit more of it next week. But for right now, just to show an example of this.
Yeah, it's just a blank
we're going to do a blank start and just kind of run through it, right? So, we can put all sorts of things in here. Some kind of standard stuff is what language the site's going to be in. So you put like English, those sorts of things, and just tell it what it is. Real standard beginning part is called a head element. And this is a top part, not to be confused with a header of a page. Everything that's in this head element is not going to be visual. It's not going to be anything seen for the most part. This is where you're going to upload or you're going to load a lot of things that we're going to use later when we start talking about running different CSS files, so cascading style sheets. When we get to those sorts of things and running JavaScript, any of those sorts of things, oftentimes you'll put those in here. But one of the things that comes in here is called a title. The title is useful because it's the top part up here where we say what's on these top tabs. So if you look at the top of my browser where it says, web app setup or index.html, it's basically the thing that's written in that tab on your site. So for here, I'm just going to write my site because that's what we're calling my site, which isn't a very exciting name. But that's how you'd customize that. And that's going to be a part that is going to be visible once we run this and we load it up. So outside of the head tag, and we're going to do some more things inside of that later. There's all kinds of stuff to set up to make it responsive to different screen sizes, but we'll save that for our front-end design development week, which is next week. This is really just setting up the bare bones to get us rolling and have something to look at. The other standard part is called the body tag. Now, this is going to be the main part of your web page, is where all the content of your page is going to be. Maybe not all the content. You might put things above this. You might put things below it. You could put footers, put headers. You could put all kinds of other things, navigation bars outside of the body possibly. But this is typically going to be the central part of your page. Now, we're not going to go through really deep on layout. There's all kinds of philosophies on how to do this. But again, typically, bodies, we're going to have most of your stuff. And so we're going to put the basically top thing that we expect people to see right when they come in. The header, a header thing, we're going to put with an H1 tag. So there's H and then a number is different headings on a page. So there's going to be the biggest heading there is. It starts with 1. Then you could do H2, 3, 4, 5. I think it goes through several layers of depth. And you can make subheadings for things, and it'll just make it bold and large. And then H2 makes it a little bit smaller. And then H3 makes it a little bit smaller. And you can set up the page layout very basically with the built-in tags like that. So we're just going to say with an H1 tag, something, doesn't matter. We could put text of any variety in here, but we're just going to say something to tell us where we are once we get our site loaded. So I'm just going to type the word, this is the index. I don't have to put any quotations or anything in here. This is just going to be passed as I write it. So whatever I write in here is going to come out, but it has to go in between the opening H1 tag and the closing H1 tag. And so this is a very, very, very basic example of an HTML page. These are the basic parts that we need, how to write a tag, where to put the information that goes inside of it. And this is our template. So we have it in templates, we have it in index. All right, so we're going to save this. And when we save it, this should be the case that if I didn't make a whole bunch of mistakes along the way, if we reload our website and we run it, so we reload the server side where our source code is, where all the code that we just wrote, including the HTML. And then we're going to open, or we just go back here and try refreshing it. And there we go. We see the changes. So we see now the text we entered said this is the text. We see up here at the top, that part that I wrote in the head elements says my site up here. Can't zoom in on that part to see it. But now we have our homepage set up. So now we have the basics, the bare bones set up for a way for us to get in to our backend site administration and do some things. We have our static files routed and set up so that we can set up some color schemes and do some pretty stuff with it. And we have a basic template to begin the front end and have our homepage up and running. So I'm going to pause there because that's the major part that we wanted to get to today. I know we got plenty of time for those of you that are moving along with us, maybe following along from the documentation that I sent out before class. If you're able to get to this point, excellent. We can move on to some other things. If no one else is stuck, if someone is stuck and would like to share maybe why they're stuck, what they're seeing, and we can move through it, I'm open to doing that as well. Does anybody have any questions before any of that? Or is anyone stuck anywhere? Nothing. Nothing at all. Okay, so then we can decide here. So there's a couple of things we could do. I could show you one more kind of Django specific front end thing about how we start doing templates a little bit more in a little bit more complex way, a little bit more of a modular way, and separate them out in slightly different files, which it shouldn't take too long to show. It's going to be outside of what I shared originally, so we're not going to have it added to the documentation. I could add it after class, and it'll be there for then. Or we could skip that, push that off to next week, and we can leave everybody here with something to play with, and you all can start going in and making changes to this if you like, add other directories or other pages by following the patterns that we did by adding views and those sorts of things. What do we think? How are we feeling? Do you want to do something, do a little bit more new stuff, or do you want to leave it at this? Touch on the more new stuff on Tuesday.
Already drinking by the fire hose. May as well keep going.
Everybody agree? Everybody want to learn one more kind of cool thing that we could have done Tuesday, but we do it now. All right, cool. I'm getting at least a couple of thumbs ups. We'll go with that. All right, great. So now we've set up this basic template, and this is basic HTML, and it just is what you would do again, what we did before when it ran in the WSGI file. We could just run it that way and just do directly with just HTML from here. But one of the things that's cool about Django is that it'll allow us to split this up to where we can keep certain elements consistent throughout our website, but change other elements inside of it based on what page that we're on. So based on the view that we have, we could separate this out a little bit and put different information in the body tag, for example. So we can change out what is inside the body tag. While keeping everything else here consistent. So it's a good way to do like a navigation bar in one place and keep it throughout the site all the way through. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to make another template file here in this templates. We're going to make another HTML file in the templates directory. And we're going to call this one base. Again, this is a convention. We could really call it anything, but we're going to call it base.html. I'm just doing this through the GUI for now to kind of keep it simple. We'll call it a new file. Now, the base.html is going to be the thing that we use over and over again everywhere. So really, I'm going to open this as well, the index, because we're going to be working between these two to separate them out. So what I'm really going to do here is take out the things from here that we want to keep in the base. And I'm going to have this part, just the part that's going to be homepage only. Okay. So I'm going to take out all the kind of, it's going to go everywhere stuff. And then the stuff that's specific to this page, I'm going to keep here. So when we say the stuff that's going to go everywhere, that's basically all of this doc type HTML tag, this head tag, and the body tag itself, excluding the content. That's basically all this stuff is what's going to be in our base file. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut all this stuff and take it over there. So I'm just going to Control X. I'll come back for these closing tags in a second. I'm just going to put these here. Go get these closing tags. Give me that. I'm going to put them down here. All right, cool. So now we have almost the exact same thing we had. So the body tag is now empty. All right, so we're going to leave this like that. And we're going to put the Django part in here. This is what's going to help us pipe things from one file to another so we can focus on just the content that's going to be inside the body tag from that other place. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in an open curly bracket, the %. It's kind of weird, but this is how Django does it. And it's not the only one that does. There's other, things that use this similar syntax. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the closing ones as well. So between these curly bracket, %, curly bracket. In the inside of this, we're going to tell it what to expect. And we could do all kinds of different things. And this is what Django's front-end interactions look like. So when we start doing things in our templates in Django, a lot of what we do is in here. And some of it's going to be some familiar logic. We can run loops in this. So when we start grabbing things out of the database in our views, and we have several of them, and we want to say like for each one of the things, we can do for loops inside of these brackets with these %. So this is the Django kind of front-end interaction piece. And what we're going to do is tell it to expect a block of something here. And we're going to tell it what the name of that block is. A standard you'll see in tutorials is the word content. It doesn't have to be the word content. It could be literally anything. It doesn't matter. This is a variable name. Block is the expected, is like a reserved word in Django. It's telling it what to expect here. Content is a variable name that I gave it. We could give it whatever we like. But this is to remind us that there is content here in this block. Now we can go down an arbitrary number of lines. It makes no difference. We can do the very next line. And we're going to do the closing tag. This takes, similarly, it takes closing tag just like HTML does. but we'll just call it an end tag. So end block. And I believe it's all one word. If this breaks, we'll know it's not, but fairly certain it's a keyword itself of just ending the block. All right, so this is going to give us the ability to put stuff into that. The other thing we need to do, I'm going to save this before I do anything else. So that's in our base.html. So this is the stuff that's going to be consistent throughout the whole site. And then each page that we go to, we can update what's on the inside of it, right? So the index, what are we going to do with this? So this is the content that we want to inject into that block. So the first thing that we need to do is at the top of the page, in those same silly looking brackets with the percentage signs, we need to do this extends call. So extends, 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 and then the string base.html. Tell it what template to extend. And that's going to say, cool, go over to the base HTML and grab all this stuff. And then in here, we're going to give it that same block tag. And we're going to name it. Again, if I could not have a spelling deficiency on my side, we'll name it the same variable name that we put in base.html. So we use content here. So we're going to do this exact same thing. And we're going to wrap the content that we want to see in that block in the same block statement that we had in our base HTML, except now we just have our element that we want inside of that to be in there. So this should, again, if I didn't forget how to type something, since I'm going somewhat off script here, and that might be the case, this should work just the same way. That once we've done the refresh and the update, again, that's what's called refactoring. I've changed the way the code was written, but I don't expect there to be any different behavior on the site. So it should be refactored in and set up in a way that's more Django-like. Let's just go to my site and refresh it from here. And it didn't break. So it says this is the index. It still works. And I guess to really prove that, we'll make a change. Say it's still the index. Refresh our application. And there we go. So this is still the index. So now we have it set up in a way that our base template is here, and we can do all we want to do to this, and it'll go through every page that we make. So if we wanted to do another page just to demonstrate this, let's do that. Let's do another page and demonstrate this. I don't know. We have to set up the whole view for all that, and the URLs. I don't want to do all that routing. Unless you all want to do another full set of routing for another page, but you could set up any number of pages and route it through, and it'll load. So, and following these same patterns, we could follow these same patterns just like we did,
but that would be like even what you're looking at right there. That is underneath the hamburger is a menu.
Yep.
Each one of those would be a route to a new page, and that's basically the structure you're seeing. It's just okay.
Yeah.
So really, they're playing that same game. They're just
it's doing the same stuff exactly. And so, we could do it. Why not? We could just say whatever. Let's just set up another page real quick and see if we can just do it from top to back. So we'll start in our views, and we'll say, I don't know, give me a page name. About? Did you say about?
About, I did.
Nice. Same time, Jinx. All right, so we'll send a request just like we did with the other one. We'll do the same basic pattern: return, render, the request that was sent, because it's going to have information we need, but we're not going to use it directly this time. And then the template we expect to see. Save that. And we're going to have to go in just our to-do application URLs, not the top level, since we already set that up, and we don't have to do anything with it. We're just going to add a path to that page we want. And since we want to call it about, We'll give it that name here. We're not going to pass the open string because that's going to be our home, our root. We'll say views dot about, which is the name of the function that we wrote in views. And then we'll give it the name, again, a logical name about, so that we can reference it in other places. So then we got the URLs, we got the view. Then all we have to do is get a template. So we're going to templates. So we're in the same place as our base and index, and I'll just make an about.html. Make a new file, and do just like we did before, and say the open goofy bracket with the percentage sign extends base.html as a string, percentage sign, close goofy bracket. And then we're going to do the same thing, curly bracket, block, the same block that we did before. So content, close that bracket up. And then I was just, as a best practice, I always end the block before I do anything else, because if you forget to end the block, it breaks, and it's really annoying to come back and remember to end your block. And then we can put anything else in here that we want to. So let's do a paragraph tag. This is the about page. So it's just gonna be a paragraph. It's not gonna be like what we had on the index, where it's the H1 tag. And the indentation here doesn't matter. So you notice, you may have noticed I didn't indent any of those things. That's not going to break anything like it would when in a Python program. So now if we go back to the web page and refresh it, we should now have the ability to go to an index, which will take us to directly here, which I guess I opened it twice. So here's the one I just opened. So this is still the index. And then you see the URL is the base URL, is nothing about it. If I add, since I didn't add any links, if I add about here, it should, oh, give me a syntax error. What error did I get?
Oh, let's see. Template syntax.
Parse remainder based HTML from base. Oh, anybody see what I did wrong? Anybody catch my error? Look at the code. Look at the debugging thing right here. Error during template rendering. What did I do wrong? Could not parse. I caught it. It's highlighted here, actually. I didn't highlight it just now.
HTML from base.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Oh,
So
single quote, double quote.
there he is. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. So you see, I mixed quotation marks here.
Yeah,
So I
single.
got double quote in the beginning, single quote at the end.
Right.
So let's go fix that. That's terrible. Amateur. This is amateur hour, apparently. Good God. All right. So there we go. Now let's reload the web page. And now we'll run it again. See if it works. Go back to our syntax error, because that's my favorite spot to be. There we go. So this is the about page. So now we have the about page routed in that same way. And we can put any number of things in here. And this is how you add pages and route through. And again, this is exactly what we called it. So we could call it anything we wanted to and build our page with any, or our website with any number of pages in this fashion. And we can continue to add layers of depth on top of this by following that same pattern in the URL thing. We just add whatever URL we want, and it is literally the address that we make. And then we put the content into a template, and we route that content through our base template. That's going to carry all of our HTML stuff that we're going to talk about more next week. So that all makes sense conceptually. Everybody with that. Anybody have any questions? Because again, we show we have plenty of time to do that. And I wasn't even sure we'd get through that piece of it, and I wasn't planning on it. But we can, I can update the written directions to make sure everybody's got all these pieces in. But I think that piece is fairly simple and straightforward. All right, great. So if there's no questions or issues, then we can wrap it up here. I'm gonna keep this on for a few minutes and stay for people that maybe were stuck. Diane, if you wanted to hand getting up to this the point that we went at last time, I can hang back and do that. And for everyone else, if you were following along and you have this to this point where you've got your homepage site set up, you don't have to have the about page that we did. But if you have a homepage, the index set up, then start playing with it. Start adding other pages. Start seeing maybe what HTML can do. We have some cheat sheets in the resource list that have some HTML stuff, so you can start playing with those. Start playing with CSS if you wanted to. We're going to set up the separate static files and the CSS and all those sorts of things next week to talk more about front end stuff. But play around with what we have here. If you were just following along, just watching between now and Tuesday, run through this again. I'll update again the documentation for the written part to include this extending the base Django bit. But follow that, practice it, do it a couple of times, and hit me up with questions. Good? Everybody
Thanks,
good?
Jeff.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your attention. And anybody that wants to hang out and talk about something, again, if you're stuck, I am definitely available and I can do that. Everyone else,
Maybe
free to
keep
hop off.
recording.
Yeah, I'm going to keep recording because, again, I was remiss when Chris ran into a problem by naming his project something other than my site and had to update his WSGI file, and I didn't record that solution. So I'm going to keep this recorded for anybody that might be stuck. It might be useful for somebody else. So if you want to hop, feel free. You can
All
watch
of
the
my
video.
painful efforts got wasted.
I know. All pain for nothing. Pain for
You got
nothing.
your
Thanks, Jeff.
supper
Have a good night.
points, Christopher.
I did.
All right,
I have a
y'all.
knack for them.
Yeah,
If I don't seek them out, they find me anyway, so I figure I might as well go for it.
exactly. Exactly. All right. Yeah, so Diane, do you want to go through where you're stuck at from before, or
Yeah, I just have I'll start off with a question.
sure, I can stop sharing my screen and you can
Okay.
ask your question. What's your question?
All the classes up until the point where you create the web page.
Yep.
This is gonna sound a little sort of weird, but do I need to know all that to get to the web page construction?
So what we did Tuesday and what we did today are the only parts you really need to do to get
Okay, well
to
then
this
it
thing.
won't
And
work until I get Tuesday down.
Tuesday down, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
I have to go back over that again.
Yeah. And
then
so that
make-
again, with the written directions that I sent out, whenever I sent them out, I guess yesterday,
Mhm,
that has all the commands in there to do all the parts that we need to do.
right,
And the full example of the settings.py file and the WSGI file that you need.
right,
So if you wanted to shortcut that and you have it up and it's just not working, you can quite literally just copy and paste
right,
all that stuff, and get it, and it should run.
okay,
So you could just
Well-
do you just copy and paste the full settings file in there because I left the full thing in there, so it should be exactly how it should be to get it up
and
and
that
running.
should be
that way.
under the, yeah, I'm printing out hard copies too, just so I can study too, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where would that, let's see, that's what you sent out the other day. Right? You sent out the cheat sheets the other day.
Yes, and they're all pinned in Discord,
Mm-hmm,
under the resources
good,
thing. But I did email them out, and I'm going to email. Well, this one I already actually emailed for today. Is already emailed out. I'm just going to update it with what we did today. But,
okay, well, that tells me then, so I'm gonna go back one,
mhm.
refresh before I hit you with any questions.
Yeah, for sure.
You
And for
know,
sure. And start again with the documentation. And again, Antoine, I just now see your question. It's hard for me to kind of watch chat while I'm going through stuff. So I don't know if you're still on, man, but yeah, generally speaking, it's like the first 2 weeks of stuff that we did was really to understand the mechanics and all that stuff. So if you didn't do absolutely everything from those 2 weeks, that's totally fine. That's no big deal. The construction of the web application was Tuesday and today. So the configuration and stuff that we did Tuesday,
okay,
that's the important piece to go back over and make sure that you can do. And there are written directions with code examples and then that you can literally copy and paste to get you to that point. And it's more important that you understand how to read it and what's happening generally than you to be able to produce it and write it yourself. So feel free to take the examples, copy and paste them. There's no shame in that at all.
okay,
And same thing for today's stuff. You could do the same thing up to the point that we were at today. Again, minus the Django-y template stuff that I wasn't sure we'd have time for, but that'll be in the list as well. So again, so you don't have to sit through all the videos you have to do because now at this point we're gonna have 9 hours worth of videos. We're halfway through the class, and it's an 18-hour total class, right?
Right.
Right.
So
Which my weak point was classes.
Yeah.
My weak point. So if I could go from there and move forward, I should be fine.
yeah, absolutely. Because Django classes, like when we did that part, I totally understand that because that's a tricky concept, and we did fly right through it. And then really the idea was to kind of expose everyone to it. And it's not super important that you have a real solid handle on it. We're going to see them again here week after next when we do the database. That's how a database is represented in Django. So it's just more important that you've seen it once. You kind of know what it is. We'll talk a little more about an implementation of them later, but it's not critical that you know how to use classes for this part right now. Like it's one of the coolest parts of the language. I definitely recommend you spend time learning it, but don't let it trip you up now to try to catch that before you move on. And same thing with the algorithm stuff. Like it's really good practice. It's great to know, but all the stuff we did for week 2, that's really just like the mechanics of things, and it's really good practice to know generally. This week is the fundamentals to the web application and what we're making. So it's important that you get this part mostly again conceptually, even if you're not writing the code out yourself, is totally fine. But try running it. Like running is the important part to make sure you can get it up and running.
Yeah, I've been running that. Like I've been practicing running that main. Because remember I was stuck on that. And I was like,
Yeah.
The main, and pretty much you were saying that's like the entry.
Yeah,
So
the entry point. And then again, if you look at this, the managed.py file that we were looking at earlier, it's that same thing. So that it follows that same pattern, which is why I started with teaching that pattern, because it's what's used when we go to this framework of Django. It's just a Python program. So it's built the same way that I showed you. It's just way more complex. There's like a lot of stuff in it,
Yeah, but now looking back, it's like that's how like uh, we write PLC code, but it's not formatted like this. It's not formatted in a linear. I want to say like it's more to where it's like written out for us, where we can see, okay, this is the main program, and then under that we have these classes. It's going to call these classes, it's going to call these classes, and then it's going to when it calls these classes, it's going to execute what's ever in these classes when we run the program. So that's what was like. That's what just came to my mind when I was doing PLC programming, because that's what I learned.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know too much about PLC programming. That's like for factory automation processes and stuff, right?
Yeah, that's like industrial stuff. So like that was the first form of programming I learned.
Yeah.
Then I learned Visual Basic and a little bit of C. And
Yeah.
I learned about arrays and Boolean. So it's just like my knowledge base is kind of like just like scattered.
Yeah, but it's also a lot deeper. That's the thing. I think PLC programming, C for sure,
You'll be
is a lot
surprised.
lower level.
You'll be surprised.
Yeah.
People think that, but it's like when people say like, oh, okay, it's a lot deeper.
Well, I just mean on the tech stack, like it's just closer to machine language than this is. Like Python is just more like a regular like human language.
Okay, you weren't talking about like the level of rigor in terms of learning it. Yeah, it's like it's pretty much all the same as far as learning. Like people have like I was saying, like people have their opinions about. I had got into a debate about with an engineer about he was like Python is pretty much useless and it doesn't have any real world application and all this stuff. And I was like, well, that's kind of silly because Google uses it in a lot of their suites actually.
I mean, yeah, dude. And so like what we're doing here with Django, that's quite literally what YouTube is built on.
Yeah.
Like they use this framework to run YouTube, and there's seriously like 1.5 million sites that run Django.
With, Pinterest, I think Pinterest was built.
Pinterest, yeah, Pinterest,
So, don't quote me on it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get off here because I'm gonna go back and review and refresh and all that stuff. So
sure. All right, Diane. Yeah.
So I'll talk to you soon anyway.
Yeah. We'll be in touch.
Okay. All righty. See you guys.
Have a good night.
Yeah, Pinterest, Instagram.
Yep.
Facebook.
That's what I'm saying, man. It's like somebody's like, "Oh, Python is useless." It's like, dude, Instagram is written in Python. Basically, it runs on Python.
But Google did pop up though, because I'm like, I know Google was one of the.
Yeah, they use it, and that's the thing is, it's not so. when we talk about frameworks next week, man, we're gonna talk more about JavaScript because it's all JavaScript, dude. Like everything on the internet is JavaScript. And so especially, if you talk to anybody that's working on web-based anything, they're going to be really biased towards that because that's all they need for what they're doing. But again, Python is really big in data science, which is by itself a huge world of stuff that, somebody actually, another participant in the course right now, she volunteered to put together a data science basic course for us that we can start running as well using Python for people that are kind of familiar with running Python a little bit. And how to do machine learning and set up pipelines and do all that kind of stuff. So like,
oh yeah, that'd be cool.
That's what I mean. It's for that kind of stuff, you're not going to be using JavaScript. No, there's no way. But all the stuff that we're doing here on how to run and use Python, you can easily go to that next. That's really simple. If you want to go to like game development, yeah, Python's not going to be your first choice. You're probably going to want to do C# or C something, some version of C, almost definitely. But you can do games in Python. It's possible. You could do mobile apps in Python too, man. Like you could do. They have a framework called Kivy that you can use to make Python apps. Yeah, Kivy, and you can make mobile apps with Python, and it's a Python framework and all that stuff. So like, it's if you're gonna do mobile apps, it's probably better to learn Swift for iOS and it's better to learn Kotlin for Android than it is to do Python. But you can, you know what I mean? So like, I don't know. I think that's ignorant to say that one of the most broadly applicable languages has no purpose in the real world. That's just silly.
Yeah, he was like, but he has a lot to say about everybody. That's the type of don't get me wrong, he's a cool guy as far as like, but he gets in those moves and
I get you. Very, very opinionated is what I like to call it, right?
I think it's just his moves. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think it's just his age catching up with him.
I get you.
It is, and his complacency with I wouldn't even say age. I'll say his complacency with the job.
Yeah.
Because he's been doing this for years. Like he's been an engineer forever. That's all he's done his whole life is engineering. So he doesn't see anything. He has the comments to say about a lot. Oh, that's such a subpar system, or it's a level of sophistication that's missing. That's what a lot of. He's one of my favorite people here. Funny thing enough, it's funny. He's a real funny guy. He just has a dark humor,
Nice.
You just learn to love people for who they are,
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's cool. That's cool, man. Yeah, and it's funny because I've run into that a lot with people really opinionated about anything tech, man. See, this guy I worked with, he's a really good guy, and he manages engineering stuff, and he was like, Python's the worst. And he had some real specific reason is like because the way it handles universal variables or something like that. I'm like, dude, I just don't care at that level, man. I mean, I get you that you have a real strong opinion about it, but for everything that I've done, it's good enough. And I know that I could use it well enough to work on bigger Python projects. I know that there are bigger Python projects. So like, it's not irrelevant. It's not stupid. It's not a waste of time. That's just
right.
This is people hating for whatever reason, man. There's like, oh, just do TypeScript or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, do TypeScript's cool. But if you really look at it, it looks like it's JavaScript trying to be Python, man. It's like they got import statements and all this stuff. And like, I'm like, I mean, come on, what's really going on with this TypeScript?
It's just people try to find ways to diminish the use of it. Don't get me wrong, there's some stuff out there that's like, it has no use. Like it is some stuff like that out here. It's like, this didn't go as planned.
Absolutely.
But it's like,
and like I said before, man, even just because you can do something with Python doesn't mean you should, right? And that was one of the things that I had the hardest time understanding when I was really learning and I was starting out was that, like, especially when it was just doing simple front end stuff and it was just JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. HTML and CSS can do a lot of the same stuff, and it really is technically like the same thing. It's honestly not even different. It's just taking the same. We're gonna show this next time. Like, it's taking the same stuff you put in HTML into a different file, and that's it. So there's really no difference between the two, but they're treated and they're presented like as two separate things, and they can kind of like they could both do animation, they could both do certain amounts of stuff, but then JavaScript does animation. So I had a real hard time being like, wait, if they all do this, how do I decide which one to use? Why would I use one versus the other? And it really is just like there's some stuff is better at it. It'll give you a better looking effect if you do it in JavaScript versus doing it with CSS. Sometimes the other way around, and sometimes it depends on your system. And so it's cool there's that much variety, but then it's also leads to people having strong opinions that are really based on maybe nothing, or it's based on one or two projects they've worked on, and so they just think it applies to everything, you know?
Yeah, I think it's like more application based. Like we're not going to use Python for even though Python is used for somewhat embedded systems. They still are, but
Yeah,
it's
it's
going to
just too
take
slow,
more.
right?
It's going to take too much. It's going to take too much to process. You
Yep.
know, it's going to use too much energy. It's very energy
Yeah,
consumptive, right?
if he's constrained by both compute power as well as electrical, I mean, just electricity.
Yeah.
If he's running off some flat watch battery on a little thing, I mean, just imagine trying to run your watch on Python versus running it on microcode, you know, for a tiny itty bitty little CPU that's got a flat watch battery. It's supposed to last for 3 years. Good
Right.
luck, right?
Yeah, it runs
Well,
Python code. You got to watch good for
if they
4
use
hours or something.
C for embedded systems, because C is it's closer to machine code, like you were saying. It's one of those lower level languages, so it's
Yeah.
you know it's able to communicate faster.
Yep.
So it's less energy consuming, right, for consumption, right? So it's better for that application. But we talk about databases, you know, you probably be better off using Python,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So it just all depends.
And that's the other thing is that even, you know, when we talk about database, like I'm going to talk about how to do database interactions through Python and stuff like that. But at some point, it's all doing SQL if you're using a SQL database.
Yeah.
You know, like
Exactly.
like it doesn't matter how you got there, it's going to do SQL no matter what. So, which is
all you're doing is adding a translator in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, basically,
you can make it faster if you know the SQL. If you don't, then you use what Python provides.
Yeah, you'll do it however Python does it, and then it'll at some point switch to SQL. And if you look I think it's listed in the settings in the middle where there's like an SQL alchemy or some shit like that it's in there. Again, it's just like everyone does it that way. There's no way to avoid it. And really, when we talk about all these different languages like Python and stuff like that, I mean, ultimately they all boil down to C basically underneath them that somebody kind of wrote a bunch of stuff to do and packaged it different ways. It gave it reserved names and stuff like that. But underneath, it's really that, and that is really assembly language, and that's really machine language. So it's really doing the exact same thing, just packaged up differently, right?
Compiler to a compiler to a compiler that eventually renders zeros and ones.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Right. All right, cool, y'all. So there's no specific question, nothing. Dig into that stuff. Yeah, Antoine, man, if you get stuck too, I'm around.
I broke it and I fixed it, so I'm all good.
Excellent. That's one of the best. That's the best feeling. That's what keeps me going through this. Is finally fixing something is amazing. Yeah. But, yeah, it's true for anybody. If you're working on this, it's always a parenthesis. It's always a parenthesis.
I dropped the parenthesis, and it was I just had to get the error log and finding mismatched. You know, just finding where it was. That was the trick.
That's how it goes. But yeah, so while you're working through this stuff, man, Antoine, if you're catching up since you missed some stuff or whatever, if you're stuck somewhere, hit me up. If you're not on Discord, you can get on there. You can email me.